Chapter 12, Diversity, Part 3. In this PowerPoint, we're going to concentrate on lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgendered officers, and to be honest, mostly just lesbian and gay officers. Most of policing, American policing, has been characterized by homophobia and exclusion. That mostly LGBT officers were excluded from policing. And so what were some of the justifications for this? Well, one of the arguments in the early days, well, not so early, really until about 40 years ago in most states, even 20 years ago in some states, the main justification for excluding lesbian and gay officers and bisexual officers was because any kind of homosexual activity was against the state law, or at least many forms of homosexual activity were against state law. So in essence, if you were practicing homosexual, then you were engaging in criminal behavior. And so just like if you were a police officer who used drugs or you engaged in other criminal behavior, you were not distinguished from them. You were considered to be a criminal, even if you had never been caught, and so therefore you weren't suitable for policing. And so this was at least the official justification. There was also concern about blackmail because society wasn't very accepting of lesbian and especially gay officers. That if some criminal knew that you were gay and you were in the closet, that criminal could blackmail you. So they could say, look, we're going to out you if you don't look the other way, if you don't give us information about any upcoming raids and arrests and those things. So both of these issues, the fact that what you might be doing in your private life was criminal, and the fact that criminals might be able to blackmail you if they knew that you were gay, these things were enough to say that you were a risk and that you couldn't be a police officer. There was certainly a lot of homophobia behind that. I mean, these were the official justifications, but there was a lot of homophobia that this is a masculine, male-dominated profession, and for some reason, anyone who's especially a gay male cannot be a masculine police officer. You know, these stupid notions, okay, that by now we should have long since dispelled. And mostly they are gone in police departments, at least. If people hold these beliefs, they're keeping them to themselves. They're more likely to keep them to themselves. But nonetheless, this homophobia was a lot of what was driving, at least against gay males. Again, like we talked about with women, maybe not against lesbian police officers, but against gay male police officers, that somehow their presence in a police department was a threat to the masculine nature of policing. Again, stupid, but it existed. Well, in the 60s, we began to see the beginnings of the modern gay rights movement. And so a really important event was the Stonewall event in 1969. So Stonewall was a gay bar in New York, and gay bars were illegal in New York because there were New York laws that said that it was illegal. And believe it or not, this is in New York City. This isn't some remote place in the in America, but this is actually New York City, that it was illegal up until the 1960s, early 70s, for a bar to serve alcohol to an openly gay person. And so if you were openly gay, you could not legally get a drink in a bar. And again, this is New York City. So, I mean, it may be hard for people today to imagine what it was like, but that was the kind of discrimination. So where would you go if you wanted to drink and you were gay and you wanted to hang out with other people who were gay? Where would you go? You couldn't go to the bars that were open to the public. So organized criminals realized there's a lot of potential for profit here. They created gay bars that were illegal. They paid off the police. They watered down the drinks. So if you were drinking there, you were going to pay a lot of money for watered down alcohol. They weren't, often within health codes, so they weren't always the greatest places, but at least they were a place where you could go, you could socialize, you could take a date, you could dance, you could you could be openly gay and not worry about somebody reporting you to the police. So there were those kinds of laws. There were laws against cross-dressing. You weren't allowed to wear, or if you were wearing clothing from not your gender, at least 3 or 4 items of clothing had to be relevant to your gender, and at least one of those had to be underwear. So you couldn't fully cross-dress. There were laws in New York, and again, this is New York, laws against cross-dressing that if you wanted to dress in drag, you're going to have to wear at least underwear. That if you're a man dressing as a woman in drag, you're going to have to wear male underwear, and the police would check. You're going to have to wear at least 2 or 3 more items of clothing that are male clothing. So again, crazy things like this. Well, in 1969, the police came in to do one of their usual raids that they did at the gay bars. So they came into the Stonewall, expected the patrons there to just go along with it like they always did. They would be arrested. They would be taken to lockup. Often they would be harassed there. The police would tell everybody in lockup what these men had, mostly they were men, gay men, what they had been arrested for, and so that everybody else in lockup would harass them, maybe even assault them. So it was pretty miserable. And so this was done at the Stonewall in 1969. And the patrons finally said, we're not taking it anymore. It was a small police unit that came in. They were probably expecting no trouble. Soon things boil over. And so depending on your perspective, either a riot ensues or an uprising ensues. But regardless, you soon have the police worried that they're not going to be able to get out of the Stonewall because there are thousands of people in the street that are now coming there and standing up and protesting and saying, we're not going to be treated as third-class citizens anymore. You're going to respect our rights. We are people too. We have rights. You're not going to put us down anymore. So Stonewall is often cited as really the beginning of the modern gay rights movement. That this is where, really this is really the first time that openly gay citizens came out and protested for their rights and challenged the police in mass numbers. And so then that progresses, organizations form as a result of it, and the gay rights movement gathers more speed. The 1980s to present, we've had more of a movement towards acceptance. So we had intolerance before, and now we have and it's probably hard for your generation to remember, but I remember my generation, I'm an old guy, that if there was going to be a gay character in a television show or a movie, that person was only there for laughs. That person wasn't taken seriously. Now, TV shows, movies, you have serious characters who happen to be gay. They're not there because they're the gay character. They're there because they're, the lawyer. They're the teacher. They're the professor. They're the teenager. They're whoever who has, a depth of character. They're a real person. They're presented as a real person. Oh, and one of their attributes is they're gay. And so just as, maybe this character is straight, this person happens to be gay, and it's not a big thing anymore. It's not something that's noticeable. This isn't the gay character in the show, and that's why they're there. This is just one of their pieces of their background. And so that's much different than even 20, 30 years ago. When I first started teaching in the 1990s, I wasn't even close to talking about same-sex marriage, because there were still many students who were saying, if you're gay, you should have no rights. And so now when I hold discussions on same-sex marriage, there's almost no disagreement. Maybe people don't. There may be students in the class who don't like same-sex marriage, but they seem to be saying, I'm not going to say anything about it. What you do is your business, even if I don't like it. But I would say the majority of the class, and you know this yourself, are going to say, yeah, there should be same-sex marriage. That we shouldn't discriminate against couples because they happen to be of the same sex. So obviously those issues have changed over the years, and I would argue that we've seen quicker advancement towards equality. We're not at equality by any means, full equality, but we've made greater advancement when it comes to LGBT issues, and maybe more LGB issues than T yet. We're still evolving when it comes to transgender issues. That we've made more progress, quicker progress than we have for racial equality and gender equality. Those struggles have been going on for much longer time. So greater acceptance. Some of that is due to legal changes. The Supreme Court in 1986 ruled in Bowers versus Hardwick that it was okay for states to still criminalize homosexual behavior. So in 1986, the U.S. Supreme Court said it's okay for states to have laws that make it illegal to engage in homosexual sex, even in the privacy of your home, among consenting adults, etc., etc., etc. Well, many states got rid of those laws in the 1980s. So even though the Supreme Court said it was okay to have them, most states got rid of them. They were saying, this violates the right to privacy. Why should we care what goes on in your bedroom? As long as it's consensual, as long as it's not for money, as long as it's private and it involves adults, why should we care whether you're straight or gay? It wasn't until 2003 in Lawrence and Garner versus Texas that the Supreme Court reversed itself. So in Lawrence and Garner versus Texas in 2003, the U.S. Supreme Court said we decided the issue wrongly in Bowers versus Hardwick. We should have said that there was protection for private consensual homosexual behavior, that whomever you want to associate with voluntarily, consensually, in the privacy of your home, in intimate relations, so with sex, that's your own business. The government has no business. As long as it doesn't involve force, coercion, so as long as it isn't rape, as long as it isn't a sexual assault, as long as it isn't prostitution, it doesn't matter whether you're straight or gay. And so the Supreme Court in 2003 finally overturned that, so that means one of those reasons for discriminating against lesbian and gay officers was gone. Definitely by 2003, that your private sexual behavior wasn't criminal anymore. And societal changes meant, if you were out of the closet, there was less chance that you were going to be blackmailed, that more people were finding there was tolerance in society, there was acceptance, and therefore we can come out without any kind of consequences. So there's less likelihood that being outed was going to cause you problems, was grounds for blackmail. So the police have also changed. You had police departments that were pretty progressive, even in the 1980s, 1990s. There was I remember an ad for the Amsterdam police that they had put out an ad because they wanted to hire more gay officers, gay male officers. And so their ad was, we like young men as much as you do. And so when you have that kind of slogan, it shows, yeah, we're comfortable. We can even joke about sexual preference. We want you. You will be a valuable member of our police force. We can joke with you. We know that you can be a good police officer. We are comfortable. Join us. We want you. And so those messages were sent out. And so there was more recruiting directed towards especially gay male officers. What do we know about some of the experiences of officers? Well, a big decision is obviously coming out in your personal life, but also in your professional life. So those officers who don't come out, who remain closeted, often feel double stress. So there's the stress of policing that you would ordinarily encounter, that every officer, regardless of sexual preference, encounters. But there's also the feeling that I'm lying to my coworkers, and we're supposed to be able to really trust ourselves. So I'm lying to them. Maybe there are some homophobic jokes that they're telling, and you're laughing just to cover yourself, even though they're very hurtful. When you go out in your personal life, when you go out with your significant other or you date, you have to go to other cities if you live in a small city. Even in a big city, you have to make sure that you're not going to be running into anyone from the police force, because you don't want to have to answer any questions. If there's a department party, you're going to have to maybe bring someone that's going to be your beard, your front. The person if you're a gay male, you're going to bring along some female. So you can't bring your significant other, you bring some female along to make it look like that you're straight. So all these things, there's all these concerns about coming out. The officers who've actually come out, there are still, the research is still pretty limited into gay and lesbian officers and their experiences. But the research that has been done has shown that these officers often feel a sense of relief. They thought the world was going to crumble around them if they came out to their fellow officers. And instead what they found was not a whole lot of reaction. Well, some officers had negative reactions, but mostly their fellow officers were completely accepting. And so that's, I think, truer today than it was 20 years ago, when, as today's society is, much more devoted to equality, regardless of sexual preference. So I think you're going to find out in the police force that you're not going to have this reaction that, we all fear when we're worried, when we have some secret and we're worried about telling it, whatever that secret might be. Well, it's also true with sexual preference. You have this secret that you've been keeping from people, and you feel like they're going to hate you, they're going to disown you, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and it often doesn't happen. Your imagination is much worse than reality. I'm not saying that happens every time, because there may be students listening to this who have said, when I came out, it was terrible. I hope not. I hope you can feel that you're free to come out and be who you are. But police officers have to deal with this stress and say, okay, what's the reaction going to be when I come out? But again, many officers felt it was a positive thing, that they reduced that stress of remaining closeted. They could start to be who they really were. They didn't have to hide things. And that people didn't run away from them. People didn't really change that much. Now, there are differences, as I said when we were talking about women, between lesbian and gay male officers and their experiences. The lesbian officers have felt greater acceptance for a longer period of time, because the assumption was, if you're going to be a female and you're going to join a male-dominated profession, you must be a lesbian. And so it's actually the straight women who maybe had a tougher time convincing people that they were straight. For gay male officers, they usually have been more reluctant to come out. And so again, that's changing as society opens up more and more. But even within that group, even within the group of gay male officers, there are also differences according to other factors of who comes out and who doesn't. And this really reflects societal beliefs. So for instance, black gay male officers are the least likely we have found of police officers to come out. So even they're less likely to come out than white gay male officers. Why is that the case? Why are black gay male officers least likely to come out of the closet? It's not necessarily because of the police department, it's because of the black community. Seems to be generally, and we're talking very generally, seems to be less tolerant of homosexuality among men than the white community. And so again, we have to look at different communities, different factors, but black gay male officers are the least likely to come out of the closet. So if we're trying to make policing more receptive, more open, a better place to work, we need to understand that and try to give those officers, all officers, but especially those officers who are reluctant to come out, a safe place, and make them realize that at least we can't control your home community, but at least in this work community, you're going to be accepted as an equal, and there's going to be no discrimination. We need to enforce that, so we need leadership that says that's what we stand for. Do gay officers experience double standards? Yes, some gay officers report that they still do, that they're worried about some of those prehistoric notions that said that, especially for gay men, that if you were a gay man, you're more likely to be a pedophile. And so these officers feel like that if I'm dealing with a kid, I always want another officer there. So if someone knows that I'm gay, I want another officer there, whereas a straight officer doesn't have to worry about that, a straight male officer. So they did feel that when they were dealing with kids, at least some officers, not all gay male officers, and again, some of these studies were done 10, 15 years ago when even society was much different. So we hope this isn't as much the case today. But some officers felt that they did have to protect themselves against charges of doing something inappropriate with a kid. They should never have to face that. Pedophilia is not something that should be associated with homosexuality. The same is true when they would search maybe another man. They would want another officer there. So there were some double standards. There were also maybe some double standards from within the department. Can you really defend yourself as a police officer? So in order to be accepted fully, and this again might have been more reflective of 10 or 20 years ago than today, they might have to do some of the things that, especially gay men, that female officers had to do to earn respect. And remember, those things were make a significant arrest, prove yourself in a fight, or earn a promotion. So these were some things that they felt, yeah, there were double standards, and I had to prove myself to be an officer, that somehow they thought I was not masculine enough to be a police officer. There were positive outcomes. Many of the officers in the early days who came out said, hey, I had instant access to the police chief, to the top officials in the police department, because I might have been the only man who came out of the closet. I might have been the only lesbian who had come out. And so anytime there was some kind of interaction with the gay community, the police chief called on me. So I wasn't just an ordinary patrol officer, I was doing special liaison work for the chief. And so, at least in the early days, when officers who came out of the closet were less common, those officers often felt there were very positive reactions. Some experienced negative reactions like we just talked about, but many experienced positive, that somehow, I was identified as, this is a person with a special skill. When we talked about diversity, I had a special competency. I knew I had a special inroad into the gay community that the department wanted to work with more closely. So there were positive outcomes like that, and again, just the general positive effect of acceptance among fellow police officers. Finally, there are various organizations and advocacy groups that have emerged over the years. In the late 70s, early 80s, around that time, there was a movement to create a special organization in New York City Police that would advocate for gay and lesbian rights, and that group was GOAL. It stands for Gay Officers Action League. And so GOAL is still around today. It has branches in other cities other than New York, and then we also find other organizations as well, not just GOAL, but there are other ones. But GOAL is one of the oldest, if not the oldest, organization that represents gay and lesbian officers. And so they are going to identify discrimination. So if a police officer feels discriminated against, they can contact GOAL, and GOAL can provide legal resources. They can provide advice. They can come in and if you have a GOAL organization in your police department, they can help to represent you and take the issue up with the top administration. They can also lead the way for other changes in policing, and so they can help an individual officer, or they can do more of a broader kind of advocacy. So not just helping individual officers, but also going and working with the top brass in a police department to change things within a department, or to change things nationally or even internationally, to make sure that we're closer and closer and closer to true equality for gay and lesbian officers, and now transgendering officers, transitioning officers as well. So I know a few years ago, we asked the Amsterdam police officers when we were in Holland, when we were in the Netherlands, we asked during the policing lecture that we always have during my study abroad class, we asked the police official, do you have any transgender officers in your department? And the police officer said yes. He said, we have one. There still aren't large numbers of transgendered police officers or transitioning police officers, but Amsterdam in this particular precinct had a transgender police officer, and so the students said, well, what's been the reaction? They said, not really much of a reaction. The Dutch are pretty accepting. They were the country that had the first same-sex marriage, so they've always been very progressive when it comes to sexual orientation and sexual identification. And so this particular officer said, at first, there were some questions, but they were honest questions. They weren't meant to intimidate. They were just people were asking some general questions and trying to get to know this person before, because maybe they had never met someone who was transitioning or transgender. And so they said once that kind of phase passed, there was complete acceptance. And they said, we don't even think about it. And so we hope that we reach that point that you can be whoever you want as you go into policing. And as we, close these PowerPoints, that's really should be our goal. That if you want to become a police officer, regardless of your background, as long as it isn't a criminal background, as long as it isn't something, dishonest background, but if you are, regardless of who you are, whether you're male, female, white, non-white, gay, straight, transgender, not, you should be able to become a police officer in America. We should be open enough, the environment should be open enough, and the same should be true when we police people in the neighborhood, that whoever you are in the neighborhood, you shouldn't face any discrimination. There shouldn't be racial profiling. There shouldn't be gay baiting. There shouldn't be any kind of harassment against women, against anyone. And so are we professional? Are we dealing with people equally on the basis of their actions and not on the basis of who they are. And I think that's really the final message that, again, we're seeing with LGBT officers, but other officers. How can we open up policing and really reflect, to go back to the beginning, reflect those 9 principles of policing? You know, we really, I think, will have better policing if we actually implement them, even though they were created well over 100 years ago. Can we return to them? Can we get that style of policing? I think if we really devoted ourselves to the style of policing that was first promoted in those principles of policing, then I think we'll have much better policing in the United States, and we'll be able to better and more effectively deal with some of these issues that continue to plague American police.